Today I'm joined by Jason Romero. Jason is a highly sought after keynote speaker for conventions, conferences, and commencements, a U.S. Paralympian who was fourth in the world at the Paralympic World Marathon Championships in 2015, a holder of 13 world records in ultra running, the subject of a full-length documentary, and an author of 2 books. In addition, Jason has been an attorney, an executive at GE, and a CEO of a nonprofit that helps children with autism. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Thanks for having me, Naomi. I appreciate it.
As people can probably guess from your biography, you've had quite the career and quite the life. Maybe we can start from the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about how your journey got started? Maybe by starting with some of the news that you received when you were younger about your vision.
First and foremost, foundationally, I was raised by my mom with one brother, and basically raised by a single mom. And that's kind of where a lot of who I am started with, is my mother and the strength and the work ethic that she demonstrated, modeled for me. When I was 14, I got some interesting news that kind of set in motion some things that would affect me for the rest of my life. I had went to my local school screening, and every year the school nurse did a vision and a hearing screening, and I happened to go in, and apparently I couldn't read the eye chart as good as I should have been able to. I thought I read it just fine, but she told me I needed to go get glasses, and I went to the local optician to try to get fitted for glasses. They couldn't figure it out. That led to a series and myriad of tests with different specialists until I found myself in a small room with a retina specialist, who eventually delivered to me some fairly significant news, which was, he told me that I was going blind. And he explained that I had retinitis pigmentosa, explained how the disease would cause my eyesight to degenerate over time. And he said I'd lose my peripheral eyesight from the outside in, end up with tunnel vision, and that would shrink down and possibly, close out at some point in time. He also said another symptom was night blindness, which I was experiencing significantly at that time. And after telling me about this condition that I had, he went on to ask me what I wanted to do with my life. And I was raised by a single mom. Nobody had gone to college. My mom told me and my brother were going to college and graduate school. We're going to do something with our lives. And so I confidently told this retina specialist I'm going to be a doctor, a lawyer, to which he responded that I should not consider that as viable options, that I would probably have no eyesight by the time I was 30. So like 15, 16 years. And I needed to learn to do something with my hands. And he told me point blank, most blind people don't work. And that was how the news was delivered to me, that I was going blind, which was a bit shocking. Not the best bedside, as I'm 53 years old now, looking back at it. I have some different thoughts about that. But the fact is, I got the news. And what I learned at that point, which was actually really nice and really good, was that I was different. And I firmly believe that we're all different. I believe every single person who's walking around on this earth has a difference. Sometimes it's easy to see, like I walk around with a cane now so people can tell I got something going on. Sometimes there's a hearing impairment. Sometimes there's dyslexia, there's hidden disabilities, there's emotional struggles. There's just a variety of different things that everybody has, we're going on with, dealing with. But that was the beginning of my journey to understand that, throughout my life, I was going to need to learn how to adapt in order to move on and accomplish things that I wanted to accomplish in life.
And it certainly seems like you've adapted in many different ways over the years. I guess from there, even though, the doctor said, do something with your hands, don't even bother with going to school, I got the impression that you did not pay attention to that advice.
Yeah, so I was 14 years old, and as soon as I found out I was different, I couldn't see like everybody else, a lot of things snapped into place and made sense. But I'm a fairly social guy. And when I was in school, I would always sit in the back row, and I was the joker, and I could never see the chalk. It was a chalkboard in my day, not a whiteboard like these days. but I could never see what the teacher was writing on there. And I didn't understand how other people were getting information. I thought everybody saw like me, like we just couldn't see what was going on. It was silly to even have a chalkboard because nobody could see what was on it. And when this eye doctor told me that I had something different going on, I was like, uh-huh. So yeah, I was like, well, I got to figure out how to get this information. So I moved up to the front row. That didn't work. My stepfather at the time, my mom had remarried, and he had told me, he's like, hey, why don't we go to like Walgreens and get some half glass readers? And we did go to Walgreens, and I got some half glass readers, and I started wearing those around. And I always make the joke when I'm telling this story that, now I got some gray, maybe they make me look kind of distinguished now. But at age 14, when I'm walking around school with these things, I got teased, they were called granny glasses, librarian glasses. And I always make the excuse that that was the reason why I couldn't get a date for homecoming, was glasses, not my charming personality. But, it was something to work with and work around. And it really did teach me that when there is an adversity, we need to adapt in order to go on and to accomplish or to achieve. And it's been a lifetime journey for me to be able to do that. Just some interesting stories about differences. Before I got this news, I remember being in English class, and from time to time, the teacher would always tell everybody, take out your books, and we're going to read for 30 minutes. And I remembered, like, I would always take out my book and I'd start reading, but after like 2, 3 minutes, my eyes would fatigue, strain, and everything got blurry, and I couldn't see what was on the page. And I thought that's how everybody was impacted. And, after 20 minutes, I wasn't seeing anything. It was just like, I couldn't see anything on the page, but I saw everybody around me. They were flipping the pages, and I would flip the pages too to pretend like I was reading. I thought everybody was faking, and I was just going along with it. And after I received the news, I realized, I was like, oh, I get it now. Like, I'm different. I'm not seeing like these guys. So that was a catalyst for me to understand, I need to figure some things out. And I did. The strategies I had at that time, there wasn't a lot of technology like there is now back when I was a kid. And what I ended up using was more lighting, like a lot of lamps, a lot of magnification. There were some large print books at the time. There weren't computers in the classroom or laptops or that type of thing. But I ended up learning how to adapt and innovate in order to be able to continue on. And one of the things I realized back then, which I hear a lot now from people with disabilities, is, if you have a difference or disability, you can do anything that anybody else can do. We just do it differently. And that was, before I even had ever heard that, and I firmly believe in that, I was experiencing that. And that's what I realized. Sometimes what it meant, though, in order to accomplish what I was trying to accomplish or what somebody else was trying to accomplish, I had to work harder. And that was no problem. I was taught, like I mentioned, I was raised by my mom, who had, just an incredible work ethic. It's what my mom did and how she raised us and was able to move us forward was absolutely incredible. And I was taught work ethic from my mom. So I had no problem, putting in the hours, staying up, late at night, going over the same book chapter time and time and time again until I was able to obtain the content, or let my, using my eyes, letting them rest, using my eyes, letting them rest, implementing additional adaptations and trying to be creative in this, because at the end of the day, the point was to try to get through school. And whatever I had to do to get through, I was gonna get through, and I eventually did. It was a great lesson for me, and something that I carried on later on in my professional career, athletic careers, my pursuits, being a father, just anything I do in life. It really has shaped me for the better.
I think the two biggest things I take away from that story is you come time and time again back to the work ethic, and that ethic that your mom taught you or showed you by, taking care of you, and how that carries you through the difficulty that maybe other people in your school weren't experiencing. And the other piece around it, I think that was important for us to think about, is the fact that, you just did what you needed to do. You found creative solutions. You found your half glasses, and, you would read and take breaks and develop your own techniques for getting through, even before maybe, you know, nowadays you have a white cane. I'm not sure if you've ever had, you know, more official instruction, but all it is to say is there's that resilience of, you know, okay, this is my situation, but we're going to put our heads together and figure out how to make it work for me. You know, I'm going to do what everybody else is doing, just like you said. It's just going to look a little different.
And you mentioned work ethic at the very beginning, and I think that's the key factor in a lot of this. And a lot of times when we do confront adversity, it boils back down to work ethic. Sometimes that could be described as perseverance or determination, fortitude, pick your word. But at the end of the day, it's not giving up or giving in, and continuing to move forward and onward. And that's been definitely a continual theme in my life. There's times too when the pity party starts, and I'm not immune from that. I've had that, definitely had that in my life. There have been times when my adaptations were not success, because when you try to implement adaptations or come up with a creative solution, you don't succeed. Sometimes if you get really lucky, you succeed the first time, but most of the time you go through a variety of different iterations of an attempt to try to adapt, and then that adaptation hits maybe 70% of the mark, but you need 85% to be able to succeed. So it's actually a failure in an adaptation. You go back to the drawing boards, modify that adaptation, bring adaptation version 2.0 to the table. And sometimes you go around and fail a bunch of times trying to adapt, and it may be 20 go arounds until you find something that works, and then your eyesight changes and you're starting all over again. But that you mentioned a key word in this, which is failure. And that's definitely a piece of my life, is failure. And I've learned so much more from failure than when I'm able to succeed and adapt and achieve something. One of my buddies this past weekend was trying to run the Leadville 100, a 100-mile mountain trail race at 10,000 feet above elevation, and he didn't make it. And there's a lot of learning and a lot of processing that's taken place. And my comment, because I've failed at that same race and I've also succeeded later on, but my comment to my buddy was, we learn more from summits never achieved. And I've found that I have learned more from my failures than I ever had from when I actually accomplished things. Like when I've failed or I've had struggle or adversity, I learn more about myself. I grow a lot more when I'm in a position of discomfort or pain or struggle than I do when things are hunky-dory and I'm in a comfortable situation. And I think that's a big metaphor for life, because with what I've experienced, even just like with living with a disability, we learn more when we're in a state of discomfort, when we're in a state of struggle, than we do when everything is hunky-dory. And I'm all about growth. I believe we get one life, we go around one time, and life is supposed to be a miraculous, wonderfully, brilliantly lived celebration of awareness, consciousness, whatever, loving, giving. And the way that I've found to actually truly celebrate on a daily basis is to continually challenge myself or put myself in a position of discomfort. And it gets old sometimes. I'm not going to kid you. And I'm not, Superman or something that never has my down days, because I do have down days. I struggle with depression. I went through a major depressive episode about 10 years ago when I ended up stopping driving. I was divorced, 3 children, unemployed, and it was bad. It was very bad. I found ways to cope with that, manage that. My eyesight continues to deteriorate over this last year. I've been working hard to manage that depression. The work ethic, like you mentioned before, I've learned the strategies, the techniques that I needed to use and implement in order to continue moving forward and working through situations of adversity and struggle. And that's what I do. And I will not give up or give in. And that I attribute to my mom.
Your mom sounds like an incredible woman.
On the racing circuit, everybody knows her as Mama Cindy. She's like 5 foot tall and barely eclipses 100 pounds. And she she is a mountain. When she's like one of those people when she springs into action, she turns, she looks like this, 76-year-old, 100-pound little lady. And when she springs into action, a racer starts doing her thing, she turns into like this 10-foot giant that everybody's just like, whatever you say, Mama Cindy. Yeah. It's been really cool.
That's amazing. I didn't realize that she was still along for the ride in your running career. So she comes to participate or cheer you and the rest of the folks on as well.
Yeah, she's so in longer distance races, which is kind of what I've gravitated towards, kind of like 100 miles and longer, you usually have a crew which helps you. And sometimes those will be pacers or guide runners. Sometimes they will be people like you may have a nurse on your crew, and you always have a crew chief, somebody who's like the leader of all your supplies and the people that are, helping you as you're running across a desert or across a mountain range or multi days or whatever. And my mom has served as my crew chief for every run that I've done. And we've been in some really interesting environments. Like, we've been in Death Valley in July, like 130 degrees, or like I mentioned, this Leadville race, mountains, crossing, running across Puerto Rico or running across Greece or across the US. And she's just learned how to crew in races, in self-support adventures, in expeditions, and she really is incredible. I mean, we've been around some of the greatest runners on this earth in some of the most extreme conditions, and it's been amazing because my mom has gleaned different techniques that other runners have used or other crews have used to try to help their runner when they get in situations of difficulty. And then she implements those things with me because after like about 12 hours of running, I'm not thinking straight. I'm not making decisions. And I rely on my crew chief or on my mom to basically, put those suggestions and solutions forward. And then we work together to keep me moving forward to try to get to that finish line.
Yeah, I guess I want to take a bit of a step back. It's been very interesting to hear about. Well, of course, running is more than just putting on your shoes and going out the door, especially if you're running at the professional level. But can you tell us a little bit more about how did you get started with running in the first place? What motivated you to take it up and go all the way to, running across the world, across the states?
There was a real formidable experience that happened to me when I was a teenager. And I mentioned that my mom had gotten remarried to my stepfather's Fred. He passed away quite a bit of time ago, but he had a brother named Ted Epstein. And my Uncle Ted was a lawyer. My stepfather was a lawyer too. But my Uncle Ted, he got to be like about 50, and he figured, he'd had enough being a lawyer, and he was going to stop being a lawyer, is going to become an artist and start doing endurance athletics. And the whole
Wow.
family looked at him like, okay, Ted, you're kind of like, what do they say? Curl your hair and brush your teeth, cuckoo. And Uncle Ted's, whatever. And he went, he made tremendous art. And then he started doing this like endurance stuff. Like, he was like training for something he was going to do in Antarctica. So we lived in Colorado. He would go to this meat locker in a small town where they had cattle, and they'd slaughter the cattle and they put the sides of beef in this like freezer. And he would go in there and he'd run in place or climb ladders for like 8-10 hours a day. And everybody's
Wow.
like, what is this guy doing? Like he's wacko cracko. Well, turned out one day Uncle Ted had I was born and raised in Denver, and Boulder's not too far away, but Uncle Ted had a race up in Boulder. So my stepfather said, hey, kids, to my mom and me and my brother, hey, we're gonna go, up to Boulder and see my brother. He's in a race. And we're like, oh, cool. I figure it's gonna be like the 100-meter limp, the geriatric Olympics, and everybody with their walker is kind of like, a bunch of blue hairs, like, you know, going down the track. Well, we get to the CU field house, pull up in the parking lot. There's no cars there. Like, what is going on? My mom, my stepfather walk us inside of the CU field house. No lights are on, no bleachers are pulled, there's no noise. no concessions. I'm like, what is going on? Like, are we at the wrong place? And then we get further on the inside of this, and there's an 8th-mile track on the inside of the CU field house. And off in the distance, like, I can't see good in the dark, but I could see with the light coming in, there was a silhouette of what appeared to be a human, and it was moving real slowly, like around a track. We got closer. I'm like, what is going on? So my stepfather, my mom explained that my Uncle Ted was staging his own 6-day race to try to see how far he could go in 6 days. And this was the 6th day. He'd been going around this 8th-mile track for 6 days. He would go for 8 hours, and he had a tent pitched in the infield of the thing. And then he would sleep for an hour. Then he'd get up and go another 8 hours and sleep an hour. And it was unbelievable. We got there, and my Uncle Ted, he's probably like 6'1" or maybe 6'2", and tall, skinny guy. I'm 5'8" on a good day. But at this point, we encountered Uncle Ted. He was slunched over. Like, him and I were the same height. He couldn't stand. He couldn't even like talk. He's like, and I was like, what is going on? And I got on the track with Uncle Ted, and he was shuffling, like he was trying to run like a very, very slow jog. I was walking as quick as Uncle Ted was running. And I just went around and around with the guy, I remember, and I was blown away. He had a little table there with his like little food and water, and then there's a bath. Like, my mind was blown. And he had all these different shoes because his feet had swollen up. He had size 15 shoes, and that wasn't what he normally wore. I mean, I'd never seen a shoe so big. And Uncle Ted ended up going like over 300 miles in that venture. But I remember, after a while, my stepdad, my mom, my brother, they all got sick of it. They're like, okay, like, we're bored with this spectacle. I could have just went around and around with Uncle Ted forever. And that blew me away, because what I realized in that instant was that we are all capable of the extraordinary, because Uncle Ted was nothing extraordinary from an outside perspective. But obviously there was something extremely extraordinary within him to do what he did. And to give you a little more flavor about my Uncle Ted, so that was my first, encounter with this. Uncle Ted ended up swimming around Manhattan Island. He was the first person to swim across the Bering Strait. That's from like Alaska to Russia, where like the whatever the dangerous catch or whatever is. And he completed the first person to complete the Grand Slam of triathlon, which is, in 1 year you need to complete an Ironman triathlon, which is 2.4 mile swim, 112-mile bike, and then a 26.2-mile run. And then you need to complete a double Ironman, a triple Ironman, a quadruple Ironman, and a quintuple Ironman. That's like, so the quintuple is like 5 Ironmans back to back to back. That's in one outing. And you need to do all that in a year. Uncle Ted did that in 6 months, and he had back surgery in the midst of that. He ran across Siberia, climbed, I don't know how many of the 7 summits, but the guy is just absolutely incredible, extraordinary. And Uncle Ted is the reason, I think he's a big part of the reason why I took up extreme endurance athletics, because he was the one who helped to give me faith and belief in myself, that even though when I look in the mirror, I don't see anything, frankly, extraordinary or special. I'm just like an average guy, like with skinny legs, but I realized there's something inside that's very special. And I know Uncle Ted had it. I found it within myself. And what I do know now is I know each and every one of us have that. It's just sometimes it's hiding in it. Sometimes we got to dig a little deeper and prod a little further in order to find it. If we want to do something totally outlandish, but we're all capable of it. And Uncle Ted's the one that set the example for me, and I was lucky to have him.
I'm asking you about, how did you get started in your career and your accomplishments, and you keep coming back to these stories about these people that have had such a big impact on you. But like you said, they didn't come from anywhere special. They were just everyday people in your life, but put in an incredible amount of work, made a decision to dig deep and do great things, whether it's being a mom, supporting you, or running for 6 days. I think you are really illustrating a point, even by talking about your mother and your uncle, about, I think, yourself as well. As I think, from my understanding, you see yourself as the person who didn't necessarily come from anything special, but just dug deep and found that whatever you want to name it within yourself that allowed you to achieve what you wanted to in life.
I guess that's the case. What I think that I've come to learn, and it's kind of interesting because I get asked to, be on podcasts or something like that, and I don't understand it sometimes. I mean, I get like the feat of running across the US, at like 50 plus miles a day, because that's a lot. But I firmly believe anybody can do it because I know who I am, and I know I'm no great athletic talent. It just took a lot of work and running in preparation to do that. And there was so much time and effort and preparation put into that. And there were so many miles, and there was so much pain endured. And there was, just a ton of things that had to happen in order for that to take place. The fact is, we all have a body, and just by virtue of us being human, we can do really extraordinary things. I mean, that to me, that was a calling as well. That was like something I really had to do, I think, in response to my depression. Like, I'm not sure if I did not end up following through in that calling, if I'd be talking to you here today. And that's, not an easy thing for me to say. But we all get in difficult times, and we all have times of adversity. And that's the thing that I've had to remind myself. And I try to remind, audiences that I speak with in my keynotes is, we all overcome adversity. And, one person's blindness is another person's cancer, is another person's getting laid off of their job, is another person's, whatever it may, losing a dog. And these different struggles of adversity are not to be compared with which one's worse or easier, because for each person, whatever that particular adversity is, it may be the most difficult thing that they're encountering up to that point in their life. And the fact is, if we're all listening to this right now, and you and I are speaking, we've gotten to today. And in getting to today, we have encountered countless small little adversities, and we've been able to overcome them to be able to get to today. They haven't stopped us. We've gotten to today. And that's something that I've always reminded myself, especially when times get tough. I'm like, I've done this before. I can do it again. And I know that. And I believe that with everything that I am. I know that I can do that. I believe in myself. I believe in divinity. I believe there's something much bigger than me that's moving things along. And if, my time comes, I'm going to be plucked out. But as long as I'm still here, I know I can keep doing it. We all have that capability. Many times it's our decision, when we get knocked down, or when we fail, or we experience pain or fear, whether we want to kind of press pause or, check out of the game. And that's something that racing really has taught me. There's a great mentor in running that I have who ended up becoming a friend. His name's Marshall Ulrich. And Marshall is the man when it comes to extreme endurance, efforts. Like, he has climbed the 7 summits, like the highest peaks in the world. And he has ran across the US at a quicker pace than I have, ran across the Badwater Desert, self-supported, and just, I mean, I can go on and on about it. It's like my Uncle Ted. He actually knew my Uncle Ted back in the day. I didn't know. But Marshall's piece of advice to me has always been, never take yourself out of the race. Meaning, if you're in a race and you miss like a time cutoff, because for many of these races, there's a time standard. They don't want you out there for like 5 days doing 100 miles. Usually it's a 30-hour time cutoff for 100 miles. Even if you're in pain, you're vomiting, you've fallen over, absent, breaking a bone or something needs medical intervention, you don't take yourself out of a race. You never quit. There's a difference between being timed out and quitting. And Marshall's piece of advice is so true. And when I've raced and I've been at that juncture to either take myself out or continue going, I have continued going. I did quit once and it haunted me until I was able to get back. Took 2 more years until I was able to finish that particular race. But what I've learned is when I get into the worst parts, when I think I'm at rock bottom in a race, as long as I don't quit and I keep moving forward and I keep trying, eventually I feel better and I can get back into a running state. And that's something that, it's a great metaphor for life. The only thing we can count on in life is change. If we're at our highest of highs, everything's wonderful, great, everything's, hitting on all cylinders, you can bet it's going to change. Sooner or later, you're going to come off that high and life's going to mellow out and it's going to change and it's going to get a little tougher. Or on the antithesis, if you're in rock bottom right now and things are very tough, you can't see your way out, it looks like there's no hope. As long as you keep moving forward, don't quit, it's going to get better. The only thing you can count on is change. That's life. It's the constant wave. As long as we keep moving forward, just like in a race, as long as you keep moving, don't quit, don't pull yourself out, it's going to get better. You're going to be able to make a comeback. And that's true in life. I've been laid off from jobs before and I thought, oh my gosh, how is this going to work? How am I going to be able to, support my family, to keep a roof over our head, that type of thing. You apply for jobs, you get rejected, go for interviews. Eventually you land a job and then you're back at it again. When you're in that position of being, at your rock bottom or in that state, facing that state of adversity, there's a lot of pain and fear that goes along with that. And that can be paralyzing at times. And I have my own strategy for how I get past those points, and everybody probably has their own coping strategy because they've gotten to today. I firmly do believe we are capable of absolutely everything and anything, each and every one of us. And I think we've demonstrated that ability. A lot of times we need the reminding that we do have that ability to overcome adversity, whatever we may be facing, because that's part of the journey of life. It's part of the beauty of life too. It makes it really cool and interesting and fun.
And one thing that you're doing these days is, well, you're coming on our show and sharing that message, but you've also shared that message in the books that you've written and the keynotes that you do at various organizations. Can you share with us a little bit about how you wound up getting into that space where you were sharing your story with a wider audience?
I never set out to become a keynote speaker or to write books. Frankly, I couldn't read many books because I couldn't see. I think, I joke with people sometimes, like I've really read 5 books in my entire life, cover to cover, and I've written 2 now. Writing those books is probably more arduous than running across the US to me with how I operate. How all that began was when I started out, I was trained and went to school to be a lawyer, found out I didn't like that and went to a business career. And I really liked that. I worked for General Electric for like 10 years and I ended up on an expatriate assignment, working in the Caribbean, eventually led a smaller division of GE Capital in the Caribbean on the consumer finance side. And they were tremendous assignments, tremendous jobs. And I ended up stopping working pretty much because of my eyes. And I went into a severe depression, what I considered my rock bottom in my lifetime as it pertained to me. And when I was in the midst of that severe depression was when I believe I received a calling from something larger than me to run across the US, and I accepted that calling. And that's how it happened. It's crazy how it happened that I could be in a total severe depression, not even knowing how to go on with life, or sometimes contemplating whether, I wanted to. And at that point, make the decision to run across the US and then do the training, figure out how to do it and actually do it in that state of mental health. What ended up happening was after I made it across the US, there was like some minor media coverage when I was going across. And afterward, I had gotten a call. I remember I finished, I got across the US and I thought, if this is a calling, maybe when I get to, to the other coast, God's going to like zap my eyes and I'll get like healed, and all the scientists can like, look at my eyes and they have the tests showing that, there was a problem with my eyes. Now they're healed. And, maybe it's a evidence of, whatever, God, or I didn't know, like I've seen movies. I don't know. Well, I get to the coast and turns out like my eyes did not get zapped with healing powers. They actually got worse over the run. And my mom had crewed me that entire trip. And she drove us back to Denver 3 days later. I remember I got back to my home in Denver and I was like, I don't know how I'm going to survive it when the depression comes back. And I was just sitting in my house waiting for it to come back. I was like, I don't know how I'm going to make it. And the phone rang and an organization asked me, they said, we heard about your run. Would you mind coming and talking to our employees about your run? I was like, talk about what? Like, I didn't even understand. I didn't get it. And I went there and I kind of hacked my way through and kind of told the story, and everybody clapped and they seemed like real happy. I was like, I didn't understand what just happened. And then I started receiving some more calls to go talk to like organizations, and they were like going to pay me. I was like, what do you mean you're going to pay me? And I'd given, talks to my employee base before, and I'd, talk to them about, okay, these are our metrics and our goals for the upcoming fiscal year. This is what we need to do to be able to attain that. These are going to be how we're going to grab the revenue. This is how we're going to manage the expense. This is what this means to you and me. And, on 3 GE, let's go. But I'd never given like a motivational or an inspirational talk. I'd given kind of like a business leader talk. Well, I ended up thinking, I'm like, well, if I'm going to do this, when in my days at GE, I'd been to keynote addresses where, you hear about, somebody who climbed K2 or, canoed across the Atlantic Ocean or whatever. And that apparently was what I was doing. But I wasn't there to just talk about some feat. What I wanted to do is, if I was going to take people's valuable time, I wanted to share some things about life that I'd learned, and obviously intertwine them into the story of running across the US, but really hit on some really important things that I think are critical for all of us. And that's what I ended up doing for the next 6 months. I, lined up my kids' stuffed animals, and I built the presentation and I practiced talking to those stuffed animals. Sometimes I'd sit my dog and my cat down. Sometimes I'd make my 3 kids sit there. Sometimes it would just be a wall, and I'd videotape myself, and I built this deck. And after 6 months, I kind of came up with a story and a talk that I think really adds value to people, and it really challenges people to make them think, and it does it with an entertaining story, but it also goes to the core of some of the most fundamental things that we all have to contemplate in this life. And that's what gave rise to the keynote speaking, and that's what I've been doing for the last 7 years. After I was given some talks, I remember after one of the talks, one of the audience members came up to me and shook my hand and said, that was really wonderful. Where can I get your book? And I was like, I don't have a book. Like, every speaker's got a book. I was like, I don't have a book. And that kind of got me thinking. And one of my kids was with me then, and Sierra, my oldest, she could drive at the time, and she would drive me to and fro some of these things when they were local. And I remember her telling me, she's like, Dad, I didn't know all of that part of the story. Like, she heard some of the talk. I was like, oh my gosh, my kids don't know how I got to this point. And I thought it was really important. Like, some of the things we've talked about, like, we all encounter adversity. We all get through adversity. We all have gotten to this point. We need to be reminded of some of those things. And that really began me thinking. I'm like, I'm going to write a journal for my kids so they understand how I got to this point, how and why this run happened. Because maybe in their life, they're going to confront something very difficult, and they're going to need to know how to get through it. And I could provide an example. So I ended up writing this journal to my kids, and my oldest daughter read it. And when she read it, she's like, you got to publish that. And I'm like, I'm not public. That's like a journal. That's like a diary, to you kids. That, like, after I die, you guys will read it. Like, I'm not. And she's like, you got to do it, Dad. You have to do it. And that's where the first book came from. It was really a journal to my kids, and it's called Running into the Dark. Then after I, released that book, did more speaking, I kept getting a common question from audience members asking me, how was it that you didn't quit? Like, how were you able to continue on through this story of, like, kind of like wave after wave of adversity? And I think we all do it. And as I thought deeper about that question, there's a process for how we get things done and how we move through failure and accomplish things. And that's true in our athletic pursuits, in our career pursuits, in our relational pursuits. And, it's the same process. After years of thinking about this, I drafted out my years at GE. I always learned, we process map things so people can understand kind of in a visual, like one-page graphic, how does this get done? And I drew the thing up. It really made sense to me as I talked more and more with people about it. Like, oh my gosh, it makes sense. I was like, I'm gonna write a book. Like, I don't know why I wasn't taught this, because I don't think I invented it. I don't think I discovered it. I think it's been around and part of our human experience for as long as humans have been around, or things have been getting done. I wanted it to be put in place because I would have appreciated that, I know, as a kid, or as I was setting out to do this very difficult task, that was first impression for me, or first attempt for me. Because part of succeeding, and that second book is called The Success Cycle, but what I learned is part of succeeding is failing. And many times when we fail in the pursuit of success, we tend to give up. Well, we don't give up. That's part of success. Albert Einstein's quote is saying, failure is success in progress. Thomas Edison said he failed 15,000 times to succeed once. And I think when you talk to people who accomplish really extraordinary things, they understand the value of failure. And that's part of this. That's part of the human experience. Part of adversity and exercising resilience is when there's adversity, sometimes if it's easy adversity, maybe you overcome it on the first time. But if it's difficult, or the first time you've encountered it, you may fail a few times in trying to overcome it. But if you exercise your resilience and go through this success cycle process, it happens. So that's, I guess, the long story of how this speaking thing and the author thing came about. It was never planned. Sometimes people ask me now, like, how can I career path into being a speaker or an author? I was like, I don't know that there's necessarily a career path. I don't know that there's training to do. I'm like, go through something really difficult, figure your way out of it, and then, have a desire to share that knowledge with other people. And I think, that's a really good way to become a keynote speaker.
Absolutely. I will admit, I myself sometimes wonder how do people get into it? But to your point, it sounds like it's not something you set out to do, but at least when you were, 14 years old, you didn't say to the doctor, no, I'm going to be a keynote speaker. But it's something that by following your calling and your passions, people responded to that, right? It's not something where you were saying, oh, I have a story that I want to share with the world. And I mean, at some point, that certainly seemed to be the case. It seems like where you are today, it just started by following your calling and your desire to achieve, to explore, to learn, to fail, and just like you said earlier, just to figure out what this life thing is all about. And through that, people came and wanted to learn more about your journey, and it seems to be inspiring people nowadays.
I think one of the things that I've learned about, telling my life story in a public space is that it's not even the story. Like, people, there's data points that people may be intrigued by, but I don't think that's really the draw. I think the real draw is that when I get up there, I tell that story with total authenticity and vulnerability, and I relive it. And it doesn't get any easier to go through it because there's some really hard parts to relive each time. And it takes a while to recover. It's a performance kind of, but it's not a performance. It's getting up there and being absolutely raw and vulnerable. And that's what I think ends up being inspiring, Naomi. I believe all of us have an amazing story, but I don't think that we all share in a vulnerable and authentic way. And there's a bit of an art too to summarize your entire life into 30 minutes and make sure there's some teaching points and you have it be captivating, take people on an emotional journey. That's a lot, but that can be learned. But to tell it with total authenticity and when I'm on stage, there's no peeling back the layers of the onion. It's raw. You get to see and feel firsthand exactly what happened. And we're going on an emotional journey. We're going to struggle together. We're going to cheer together. We're going to cry together. We're going to hope together. And it's the human experience. And I think it's couched in a cool story of, running from Los Angeles to New York at like 2 marathons a day, getting chased by dogs and all kinds of other crazy stuff that happen. But it's being real. And I got to tell you too, those are the most impactful conversations that I've ever had, is when I get a chance to talk to a person or connect with a person when they're being their real and true self. And whether that's a keynote person on a stage or a person you pass on the street, those are very special moments in life. Those are moments that we remember. Those are moments that can have a real impact on us and on others. And, I encourage everybody to get to yourself, be okay with yourself. I got to tell you, for, an important piece of this story too, is from age 14 to 44, I was in denial about my eyes. I had extreme shame about my eyesight. I wouldn't tell anybody that I couldn't see. That included at work. And there were times probably I was driving, I shouldn't have been driving. Things that I was doing, I probably shouldn't have been doing, but I was too shameful about my condition to tell anybody else, until it got to the point where I couldn't hide it anymore. And I was not being my authentic self. I was not being myself. I was being an imposter. And it's only within the last 9 years have I really learned and embraced who I am. And that came at the cost of, a lot, many things. And I went through a very, very difficult time in life in order to emerge the other side. It's almost like, a catharsis, like a caterpillar going into the cocoon and then catharting out as a butterfly. Not that I'm a butterfly, because I know I'm not the special look at everything. I don't have those beautiful wings, but to myself, I believe I've become, a better person, a better father, a better citizen in the community as a result of going through that very difficult and arduous time. And I do have true empathy and caring for everything. And it's made my life, better. And every day I'm grateful for just one more day. So I'm able to really love others. I'm able to really love myself, which I don't think I could do for like the longest time. And part of that was because of my eyesight. And I was resentful for having this disease, for, blaming everything on everybody else and being a victim and having my own pity party, to finally getting to a point where I can realize what I considered a curse is actually a real blessing in my life. And it's just part of my journey. And my journey is my journey, just like everybody has their journey. And it's okay, because it's my journey. I'm not perfect, but I'm trying to live life as fiercely as I can every day.
That wraps up or summarizes a lot of really important points that you brought up today, because I always like to ask, as we get near the end of our conversation, for people who are listening in and who are learning about your story and thinking, well, maybe I'd like to start running, or, maybe I'd like to start sharing my story, whether it's talking to people or in a book. And I always like to ask my guests, what advice do you have for them? Sounds like, authenticity is a big takeaway that you'd like people to keep in mind. Is there anything else that you'd like to add for our listeners who are maybe hearing our conversation and thinking, how can I get started, or where could I go from here based on wherever I am in life, whether it's in a moment of success or maybe in a moment of difficulty? Yeah, well, I mean, it was an absolute pleasure to have you, Jason. I won't speak for everybody else listening, but I'll just say that I learned so much today. I think I learned a lot about authenticity, about hard work, all the pillars, and just, I think that regardless of where you are in your journey, you just have to take it one step at a time, one piece at a time, and be kind to yourself, but don't give up. So thank you for sharing that message with us. And I wish you all the best in whatever path you are taking in the future.
Thanks, Naomi. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, you too.
Okay.